Vaishnav Institute of Architecture and Planning. I, Asta Jaiswal, welcome our distinguished Director of Sri Vaishnav Institute of Architecture, Architect Vishal Yadi, the Head of the Department of Urban Planning, Mrs. Ritu Sharma Mehrotra, fellow colleagues, and all the students. Goddess Saraswati is the authority on academics and arts. So before the commencement of this webinar, Samvaad, let us pray to Goddess Saraswati through the virtual lightning of lamp and Saraswati Vandana.
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः या कुन्देन्दु तुषारहारधवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्करप्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा.
I feel extremely proud to announce that our institute has completed 6 academic years with a vision to create an educational environment that engages deep intellectual moral and creative stimulation, thereby nurturing skill development, teamwork, and leadership qualities. Behind this huge success are our visionary director, dedicated teachers, motivated students, and helpful staff members who work hard to give their best to make this institute achieve great heights. With these objectives, we are proud to host Samvaad, monthly architectural and planning webinar. This event serves as a great platform for the experts to share their knowledge and research in the field of architecture. Our goal for this students the exposure I would like to begin by introducing architect. Architect is our development practice designer. She hosts the Business Foundation, which as a collaborative practice engages in community participation at its core. It placemaking, participatory planning, policy, skill development, and capacity building. She also works as skill specialist for sustainable jobs at the World Bank and is a fellow at Just Jobs Network, where she looks at aspects of skills and livelihood for national issues. Currently, she is the head at Delhi NCR for Placemaking India. I would invite Architect Ritu to share her insights on community-embedded approach to sustainable growth.
Sure. Thanks, Asta, for the introduction, and thanks, Ritu, and thanks everyone else who's here today to listen, the faculty and the students. I was finding Asta's voice a little broken in between, so I'm not sure if everybody also had the same issue. So I'll just do a quick introduction, and that's going to give a little context also to what I'll be presenting. So like Asta said, I'm Nidhi. I'm trained as an architect and environmental urban designer. and thereafter also did environmental law. So I work on aspects of development, probably not typically what architects and planners do, but I try see how we can work in a very integrated way. And with that approach, I had founded my organization, which is called Sehe Riti. So Sehe is collective and Riti is practices, with the idea that the process of making a city, or the city making process, is a participatory one in which all kind of stakeholders come in together. So it's not just us, the planners or the designers or the architects, but also, let's say, of course, the politicians, the bureaucrats, historians, anthropologists, the community, largely. And that's the kind of practice that I like to do. Beyond that, I also work in World Bank and another policy think tank. So trying to work on aspects of inclusive sustainable development. And today, what I'm going to discuss with you is how do you get community at the core of what we know as planning or development, and what are the approaches that can be taken? Some of it is not very obvious, but we'll, maybe while seeing the presentation, you might get some ideas. So I'll share my screen and probably we can take it from there. And Asta, if you could let me know if I share the screen, does the slide go next?
Yes, ma'am, it is going.
It's going next? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Okay, so what I've called my presentation today, and this is something that I'm going to come back on, is that, how do we hook for community, or how do we hook for, what we call it as in the planning instrument, how do we get community part of it? So I don't know if you know that in a lot of slums or, informal settlements, what do community largely do when they want an electricity? They'll do what we call as hooking. एक टांग देंगे उसके ऊपर and अपने वहाँ पे electricity ले लेंगे, and उनको करने की जरूरत पड़ती है because, they want the infrastructure which is not given to them. So what I'm really talking about today is a lot of what our planning instruments or approaches today are. They probably might be talking of community participation, but they don't really have enough voice and the teeth to allow that. And the community then needs to find these hooks to attach themselves and negotiate for those. So this is like a typical planning exercise, right? Like this is what you might be studying from you, etc. Like, how do you basic steps, right? So you do analysis, there's a policy, there's a feasibility study, you'll do a master plan, there'll be some kind of zoning, you'll come to urban design guidelines, there'll be bylaws, etc. And in all of that, we assume that there is somehow public participation going to happen at each stage. So from the, the point of master plan to actually coming up with let's say a local area plan to, let's say, actually having the building bylaws and urban design guidelines, there would be some kind of participation of people, and we assume that that's happening. You might have already heard a lot about top-down planning and a bottom-up planning approach. Bottom-up planning approach is where community actually decides what they want, and then they try integrate that within the planning ecosystem. Now, there are multiple schemes that India has right now, be it the Amrut, be it Hriday, be it Smart City, be it PMAY, all of them, Swachh Bharat, all of them have aspects of community participation written that, you need to talk to people. For example, Hriday is about heritage, right? So management of heritage cities. And they would say that, evaluate or value the heritage assets with community participation. What do community find relevant for them? Or in Amrut, which is all about the infrastructure development, or Smart City, of which I'll show an example of how that can be done or is done. Now, but the moment, this is like a quick, just a Google tab on what is Smart City. And then when I put this, these are the kind of images that I get in the search engine, right? So I've just typed Smart City, and this is the kind of an image that I get. I don't know if you feel something is missing in this, but what I feel missing is this, right? There is no discussion about people in the last image that we saw. In this image, I don't see any person. There are these buildings, there are discussion about technology, but we don't discuss about people whom we are actually designing for or whom we're planning for. And that, I think, is the main crux of what we are going to discuss today. So how can we have people at the heart of city making? How do we do that? And what are the different kind of approaches? So what I'm going to take you through are some of the projects that I've been engaged in, and maybe probably have, we can have a discussion about that whether they allowed that kind of bringing the people back into the planning ecosystem. So one is about Mehroli. Mehroli is an urban village in Delhi. It's a historic urban village where the Qutub Minar is. Qutub Minar is a UNESCO protected site. And of course, under ASI and everything, but the entire settlement behind Qutub Minar is also very historic. That's where you have the Sufis, you had Zafar, you had lot of history to Mehroli. It is one of the first cities of Delhi. So if you know that Delhi had 7 cities, so that's one of the first city of Delhi. And we started working in Mehroli to find out that, how can community-led integrated inclusive planning happen in Mehroli back in 2014 or 15. And we work with the INTAC, and we had we evaluated that approach. So we called it the community embedded approach for conservation of Mehroli heritage area. And if you see, Qutub Minar is here, but what we are talking about is the entire settlement behind. So that's in the dots in the red are historic monuments, but many of those historic monuments are within the settlement itself. And otherwise, the settlement is growing as an urban village. No bylaws per se, a lot of other development, heritage is being lost. So we started evaluating what is it that, the community want there, and is there some way that, with a community-led approach, like a bottom-up approach, can we actually do conservation of Mehroli? And we had this idea, or we have this principle that it is really the community which gets engaged in this act of building. So the community, if you see everyday houses, they get built by people themselves. They're not going to ask an architect to come over and make their little hut or do little repairs. Community does it themselves. So that act of building actually engages community. They are the ones who are engaged in the maintenance, and hence they are the ones who are engaged in an urban renewal or a heritage conservation. And how do we do that is what our query was. And we started working on different aspects of it. So we had a workshop called Sense of History. What is it that community want? Can we evaluate that? We started working with different authorities, be it the MLA, be it the Delhi Development Authority, be it various others, aspects. And we thought that let's begin the work in Mehroli with this pilot space, which was an urban, which we called it as a gateway of Mehroli. It's called the Adam Khan tomb, which is inside the settlement. And it has its own history there behind this, you can see probably. And we started thinking that how can we develop this as a public space, This is where a lot of traffic gets into Mehroli, a lot of chaos happens, but it is also a place where people come out. This is the only public place where people come out, sit on top of this monument and just enjoy what's around Mehroli, along with the hustle and bustle which is happening. And how did we approach, what the community wants? Over the 2 years, we started doing these, what we call as workshops, which were called Hamari Mehroli workshops. Now, these workshops were multi-stakeholder workshops, and they were immersive workshops on different aspects of Mehroli. So, for example, Audible Landscape, which is the first one, was a place-making workshop where we showed how there's this historic area called Shamshi Talab, and it has a little park area and everything, very interesting, but again, in a very derelict state of affairs. And we started working on a place-making kind of a project, quick tactical urbanism, as we call it, something which is a quick intervention to show the potential of that place. And within 2 days, we had to transform that place. And all of these workshops were multi-stakeholder, and they were completely intersectoral in the sense that, we had, of course, designers and planners and architects, but we also had historians, we had anthropologists, we had graphic designers, we had lighting experts, all kind of people who probably come into when you're talking about city. And the most importantly were the citizens themselves from Mehroli. So every workshop had participants, either from the RWA or either people would just walk in, etc. And we would try host these workshops in a public place. Many of the times those public places were given by the settlement or the people of that community themselves. For example, one of the workshops was held in the police station. And that also tried to break, the idea that, you cannot approach the police. And police wanted that. They wanted to be seen as somebody, because they're situated in the heart of Mehroli, but people are, of course, very tensed about it's a big police station. And we kind of tried to bridge between who the authorities are and what do the community want. And by police giving us their hall or the venue, this allowed that. So you had people coming into the police station for a conversation which you never see. So this is the one which I was saying, it's called the Audible Landscape. And this was the Shamshi Talab. It's a historic site, very, very important historic site, but it doesn't get used properly. In most of the days, you see just, people playing tash or the drug addicts roaming around, and the children are not playing. So we started working, like I said, they were very interdisciplinary groups. Of course, children, we had the RWA people, we had somebody from street art. So we were trying different methods on what can actually be done. And we thought, let's do a quick transformation of the place, and with a simple installation called a phone. I don't know if you all as kids must have put like one glass on one side and the other cup on the other side, and you can hear sounds. In this space, what used to happen was that one area was used by children and the other by the elderly men who had nothing really to do in the day. And so the women of the house were not very comfortable in letting their children down into this park. And we wanted to break that taboo of this place. So we came with this installation, and that kind of encouraged, people from the side where the men were located and where the children were, and they started communicating. And there was a big party at the end of the day in this space. Another one, what we did was Mehroli Talkies, which was about capturing oral stories or oral narratives of Mehroli as a settlement. Now, like I said, it's a very historic settlement. There's a lot of information out there with the people themselves. And what we did was that first we taught our participants on how to make a podcast, or how do you know the technology of it. And then thereafter they went and actually captured stories from people, recorded them. And in fact, one really interesting one was about gender and security, and it kind of mapped which areas are, not safe for women, what are the threats, etc. And this, again, we sent it to the police station, and they kind of started working on those areas also. And then we work a lot with children. So we work with, the idea for us is that children really are the stakeholders, and they need to be aware about, their settlement. So like I said, this is Adam Khan Tomb. It's located within the settlement, but not many people know the history of it. And we started getting the children from the settlement itself. This monument was right opposite them, but they had never been there. And we started exploring, this was called Shapes of Mehroli. We started working on different aspects. They kind of decoded how a monument, how something like this gets built, how does a dome gets built. They made models. We held like a neighborhood museum in one of the buildings, and just capturing stories and narratives from Mehroli. And they all came and visited people. It was open for like good 7 days. We do these kind of workshops called Sense of Place, just understanding how you perceive an urban space. How do you observe and document and enjoy an urban space? So these are the kind of walks that we regularly also do. And we're still working on actually making a planning document about it. And while all of this engagement with the community was happening, we obviously kept working with the authorities on actually saying that let's make a development plan for it. So we've had like something called Mehroli Environment Improvement Program. And we suggested on what aspects needs to be done in terms of public health, mobility, community, history. This was given to the authorities. We had a lot of meetings, etc. But what happens in our planning instrument, I'll come to you about that. It was also given to UN Habitat. This was the public space that I said that we wanted to transform and what could really be done. But what happens in public is like, where do you put it? So we thought, okay, there is no dedicated scheme for having a improvement plan for Mehrauli. Earlier, Delhi had something called local area plans. Now that also do not exist under the master plan. So we thought, okay, let's put it under the Swadesh Darshan scheme, which is about tourism. In fact, the Delhi government only told us to do that. And because we are a not-for-profit company, we had to get another partner. So we thought, okay, Delhi Ambedkar University could be one of the partners. That was one way. Then MLA fund has a certain amount of money. We constituted something called like an MLA planning board and started working with them that, okay, maybe something could happen there. So there are multiple such channels which are being done, but somehow, these don't get implemented as it is until unless there is a top initiative also to do planning. So, I mean, that's what I wanted to bring out. And what is happening right now, I don't know if any of you captured in the news. So in 2023, under this whole G20 and everything, there's all sorts of demolition happening in Mehrauli. And had we actually been able to do that bottom-up planning approach that we were saying, and we got the perspectives of the community and found out different ways that it could be done, maybe this could be an unavoidable situation. But that's the irony of our planning system right now. And there are ways that, something like that could happen. So for example, Delhi has come up with the new master plan of 2041, and they speak about these aspects about, certain zones, like there should be influence zone plan, there needs to be heritage precincts, integrated GDA plan, cultural resource management plan. Now, all of them are great as words, but there is no implementation guideline about this. How does a community come and say that I want to make a culture resource management plan? It doesn't happen because community wanted to propose here, but the government was not very interested in actually doing that. So I think that's a big miss between what the planning ecosystem is and what really the community wants. And there are ways, if you look at, internationally, there are multiple instruments that we can see of community embedded planning instruments. For example, there is this one where there's a public space master plan. We've never seen that in India, that, you actually have a master plan for making public spaces, but they do exist. And that's something that, especially me as an urban designer, we would love for that to happen in our cities. Or there are various ways that how and what community can come in. So there is something like you have a master plan, of course, but there could be a public space management plan which could come in. Those kind of things could be anchored by the local politicians, the MLAs, institutes like yours could actually help in, civil society organizations could come in, and the entire role then needs to be, with the community themselves, and experts and local authorities become co-facilitators in that process. And that's the kind of instrument that I think we really vouching for. There was, of course, the local area plans, which now I'm not sure in your city if they're happening, but in Delhi, somehow they're not happening anymore. And even when they were just remained as a document and not much could happen. But they are very, very important documents because they are the real core of bottom-up planning, where the inputs from the community is taken. In fact, the entire plan is supposed to be ideally made by the community themselves, and you get professional experts just to feed in the right information. But that instrument somehow is moving away from our planning works across India. Another example that I wanted to show you is about natural heritage. So I'm not sure if you guys know that there is something called Nagoya Protocol, which India is a signee of. And in that, we really are talking about conserving and preserving a biodiversity and having an equitable sharing of access and benefit of that. Which means that, if let's say, I know some of you might know about that example where Ramdev made a medicine from a forest in Uttarakhand, and the community said that, you can't take all the money. It's ours. It is our traditional knowledge. It is our biodiversity. So there should be some sharing. So that's the background of it, that, the community needs to know what exists in their own habitat. This doesn't only mean rural, it's rural and urban. And every community, for example, every Gram Panchayat and every municipality has to make something called People's Biodiversity Register. And it's people's, right? So that means that it has to be made by people themselves. For this, there are something called biodiversity management committees, which have been instituted at every local area, be it the municipality, be it the Gram Panchayat. And these BMCs are then report to what we call the State Biodiversity Board, and the State Biodiversity Board reports to the National Biodiversity Authority. And there are various, why this biodiversity register is important, but largely it is to protect the biodiversity, flora, fauna, traditional practices, our traditional knowledge of how we live, all of that, to actually maintain it, but also give that traditional knowledge to the community. Now, we as a consultants or volunteers started working with another organization which was given the contract by the government to make these biodiversity registers in 50 villages of Aravalis in and around Gurgaon. Now, what we realized was that these consultants by themselves had zero knowledge about biodiversity. Second, when they go to the community, they don't really capture anything. We had experts who, are part of that villages themselves, and they knew. But clearly the biodiversity management committees who were supposedly responsible for making these biodiversity registers had no capacity. And like any other committee, they were just names on the paper. Now, these are the people who are supposed to be the care holders or have the information and then negotiate for that settlement, but they were nothing. They were almost non-existent. Like many of our decentralized planning committees that exist. And that's where, the challenge is. On paper, there is discussion about capacity building of BMCs, but nothing really happens on that. And these are very, very important areas for natural heritage. This is a village called Bhonsi. You have these water bodies. And if you know that Aravalis are in a great threat, and the fact that these BMCs are not being nurtured, or the capacity is not being built, all of the instrument of making a people biodiversity register becomes very hollow. Now, after doing this, what we realized that we want to work with the community, not as a touch and go, but a long-term initiative. And we started a program called Mera Mangar. Now, Mangar is a very, very unique settlement in the Aravalis. It is the last, almost like, the epitome of what an Aravali forest could be, but it is still not designated as a forest by the community, by the authority. It doesn't come under the Forest Act, but it is a forest. And there are environmentalists who have been almost fighting for getting the nomenclature of forest for this area. Now, there are a lot of real estate pressure, of course, and Mangar is also a sacred grove. So the community, so far, it doesn't cut the forest or doesn't cut the trees. And it is also something what are called a common property resource, or a CPR. And I'm sure some of you might have read about what a CPR is and what kind of laws and bylaws exist for CPR. Now, a CPR is something which is managed by the community themselves. What happened in Mangar's case is that even though it is a CPR, the land was with Panchayat, and Panchayat gave the land to private stakeholders. And the private stakeholders started selling the small patches of their forest. Now, so the entire patches of the forest have been sold to a developer called M3M. And with the fight of the environmentalists and proving that this is a forest, at least there is a hold from the NGT and the Supreme Court that no cutting of trees would happen. And the fact that the community values it is also there. But there is a lot of pressure. So there are hotels coming. Of course, there's a proposal of making a tourism park and all sorts of things happening. So what we started doing not as an environmental activist, but rather with an approach that community needs to understand what exists in Mangar themselves. And we started working with the children and youth in Mangar, about 50 of them. And what we really do is document and appreciate and observe all aspects of that Mangar as a settlement. So we look at all the basic things that you might do in your planning and design studio. So we're mapping cultural heritage, we're mapping built heritage, we're mapping natural heritage, we're mapping demography, we're mapping cultural practices, we're actually doing physical documentation and mapping in a way that community understands and is able to appreciate what exists. And an output of that is a magazine called Mera Mangar, which comes out from the works of children themselves. And there have been 2 volumes already, which have come out, and they cover different aspects, right? So they for example, here the children are showing their house, how their layout of a house is, what exists around the house. On the other day, we were trying to map a certain street, entirely on left and right. We also do aspects about, how do you understand Mangar? So, mere man ka Mangar kaisa hai? I don't know if you guys have used cognitive mapping as a tool. So, we're trying that kind of tools and methods to work with the children in mapping the settlement. And look at this interesting map which a person has made, a child has made, and he's made the important temple, the bunny, all the settlement around, and in a very innovative way. So we don't tell them that this is how a plan is supposed to be, because we don't want to guide or even cloud their imagination. And this is amazing drawing that the child has come up with. Then we are also, like I said, mapping flora and fauna. And there is this bird called Indian pitta, which is very, very, very significant. It migrates to the north from the south in a certain month. And here there's Shivam, who's actually drawn that Indian pitta, and he's well aware of all the flora and fauna in that forest. And we also look at different kinds of flora. So a very important tree in that area in Aravalli is dhaw. It holds the soil. So, we do these kind of tools called mind maps, and we capture different aspects of dhaw, right? So we have these questions about the 5 W's and how. So why, what, where, when, and how. So why is dhaw important? What is it important for? Where does it grow? All those kind of aspects. So they actually make these mind maps. He's made a tree, because dhaw's roots are very important. That is the roots which capture, the soil, and it's very good for water conservation in a hilly area like that. Then we capture local weeds. They eat local weeds, and these are edible weeds, and what kind of sabji or vegetables they make out of it. So, so the different such aspects that we look at this. It's a long-term project. We've already been working there since 9 months. And I think that's the way one works with the community, slowly and building their capacity. The other example that I wanted to show was when I said that Smart City also has this aspect of community participation. Now, there was a challenge there is a program called Streets for People in smart cities, where the idea is that, you reclaim the streets, you pedestrianize certain streets. And we had won a competition, which was done for the city of Gurgaon, of pedestrianizing Sadar Bazaar. And within the Sadar Bazaar, a neighborhood challenge, where an area of near a school. So this is the area, and there are school buildings here on both sides of it, and in between was just being used for parking. And it is the same school. They can't even cross and go to the other side, because this is the road which is going towards the Sadar Bazaar, completely used by parking, the rickshaw, the auto walas, the men. And the school is a girls' school, and the girls were not even allowed or did not even feel comfortable in hanging out in their own space. So our idea was really that how can we give them this space for pause, a space for leisure, a space for just being outside their school comfortably and not being hampered by, all the, the crowd, which doesn't actually need to be there. And how do you create something like that? And the approach of this entire planning exercise is that, under the Smart Cities mission, is that we would give the design and we work with the community. So we interacted with the teachers, with the students, with the stakeholders, and then we come up with a project of a tactical urbanism. So for 1 day, 2 days, 7 days, depending on each city, you actually show them that if you transform this place, this is how it will look. And once they accept it and enjoy it, this becomes a plan, which then the city will implement. So we did that, and our ideas were For example, on both sides of it is the school building. How do you make it an innovative space? We had, of course, different kind of wall arts. We had placemaking elements. We had an open library. We had street furniture, various kind of interventions. The kind of dreams that you have for yourself, like a dream wall. So this is how the street actually existed before we intervened. So you can see, the electric terminal, a lot of waste just kept there, absolutely no care for this space, right? And then, and we had various kind of interventions that we proposed in this area. And this is how it transformed in the day of when we held it. So all the wall art was actually made by the students themselves and their teachers and our volunteers. We had this wall, which is about what do I dream to be? What do I want Sadar to be? We had like an open live music and like a rahagiri, which gets done in this area. We had something called like an open library that we did. Again, a very quick thing from a cigarette kiosk thing. We made like a library space where people could actually come out and read. And we made these, from the oil barrel, we made some quick infrastructure, kept some books. People, while going through that space, were reading that book. There was play spaces that were created in this little road for everybody to enjoy. And what I'm leaving you with was this interesting thing which happened. So this area, there was one girl who was Muslim and she was wearing a hijab. There were not many such in this space, but we had one book of Malala, which was kept on the back of the cigarette kiosk that I showed. And so I interacted with this girl prior, 4 or 5 days ago, and I asked her, so do you have a library in your school? And she said, we do, but it's always shut. It's never locked, we never go there. So I said, okay, so we're planning to keep a library. Will you come? So she said, yeah, maybe if we get allowed, we'll come out and, just be in your library space. And she came with her friends and she saw this book on Malala. And then she asked me, who is this? And I said, that's Malala. So she's like, mujhe to nahi pata wo kaun hai. So she said, why don't you go read? So she picked up and she found someone who is, like her, has achieved something or is wanting or in the process of. And she called her friends and she said, come, let me tell you about Malala. And they all sat in that, little space that we made. You can see the furniture is out of tires and, this bamboo structure. And they are just reading this book on Malala. Now, that is something like an open library can give you and completely transform that space and probably created a spark in this girl. And that's what I want to end with, really today, that while there might be a lot of planning instruments, what we need is, coming back to the hooking example, is to find a hook in those planning instruments and figure how do we get community engaged. And there's a lot of possibility. Community is the core of all the planning and the design work that we do. But as a designer, as a planner, need to probably reposition ourselves as rather facilitators than just saying from a top down that this needs to be done. We need to work together with them, facilitate the process of development, and probably see ourselves in a very different light, is what I've observed in last, whatever years of practice that I have. So thank you so much. I'll stop sharing, and if you guys have questions, would be happy to get your reactions, etc.
Thank you, ma'am. This session was indeed an enlightening one. And I think we all agree with you that how public participation is very much crucial for the sustainable development. And not only that, but also saving our heritage, culture, and environment along with it. And I'd like to thank you for sharing your treasured knowledge with us. And I request everyone to put questions, if any. Anybody please have any?
Nidhi, I have a question for
So
you.
they can come forward with your.
Nidhi, what is the role of these local area plans in Delhi now? Like, if it's not part of Delhi Master Plan 2041, then how they are they are not implementing local area plans?
Yeah. So now there is no local area plans that exist. So the idea is that they're saying the master plan itself is so decentralized
Right.
that people will tell, but there is no instrument of
But
local area plan.
But I don't think the Delhi Master Plan is as much decentralized. That's what
No,
actually I've I've also understood from the master plan that it is not as decentralized as it was earlier, I think.
there are no zonal plans also now.
Right,
So no
right.
zonal plans, no local area plans, only the master plan. And within the master plan are those terms like influential plan, heritage area plan. But those proposals cannot come from the people. So those proposals will come from the authority and they'll say, like, we've been pushing that, Mehrauli, call the Mehrauli as an heritage precinct and make a plan for it. But we've not been able to achieve it because there's no local area plan. Had there been a local area plan, we could have gone and said that within the local area plan, we'll preserve it as a heritage precinct.
Exactly.
But if there is no instrument of it, how do you leverage?
So earlier they prepared some area-based plans, I remember, and there are like few documents also on area-based plans. Are they being implemented or not?
Yeah, so the area-based plans are, so there are two kinds of plans, right? So within the smart city, you can have the area-based plans. That again is the area is selected by the city authorities. It's not, again, bottom up that you can say. Local area plans were earlier done. So these were part of the 2021 master plan. They were made for at least many master plans, but they did not get implemented. That is the strategy. So many areas actually made the local area plans. A very nice instrument with the RWAs, with a lot of public consultation and experts coming in, but they never got implemented.
Oh. Okay, I think we have some other questions also, Nidhi.
Ma'am, we have one question from the student of urban planning. He has asked, did the initiative change the economic conditions in nearby areas of Mehrauli?
It could have, like I would say, if had that public space project would have been, or many of these, like I said, they don't get implemented immediately, right? So 100% that would have an impact, and that's what the project was targeting. That if you'll do an environment improvement, and environment doesn't mean environment as in paid pause, but environment as in urban environment, natural environment, cultural environment. If you do that kind of improvement, the benefit happens for everyone, for the community, for the traders, the shopkeepers are located in that space itself. They would, people from outside people would come and experience that. Of course, that would benefit them.
Nidhi, one more question. How are you arranging for the finances? Like you've been working on so many, areas like Mangar, you just told, Mehrauli was one of it. Then how are you arranging for the finances and how you been?
Yeah, that's not, so Mehrauli, mostly the workshops were paid workshops. So, within the 2-3 days that we worked, the participants would pay, the outside participants, not the community. For community, it's free. Because of course we want them to interact. So Mehrauli was done like that. Nothing for our human resource or our planning works, that doesn't get paid. So I work as a philanthropy, and Mangar is largely self-philanthropy and some donors, private friends and donors who have come in. But it is more or less like that. And then, like I said, I do other kinds of work to subsidize this work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other question? Yeah, there should be a lot of questions.
74th Amendment. So that's exactly what we are talking, that, the 74th Amendment is the crux of decentralization and about ward level planning. And the local area plans are that instrument of doing that ward level planning. The local MLA is supposed to play a role. We did constitute, like I said, the local the MLA planning board. That was never done before. We made that for Mehrauli. Some work is happening. So Mehrauli as a ward has other areas also. So some work within that is happening, that the MLA was able to push for a pedestrianization of an area near a school in Basant Kunj. Also, you have to understand the dynamics of people, right? So Basant Kunj is more influential than Mehrauli. So they were able to push that with the authority, but that instrument does exist, and MLA also has funds, I think easily like more than 20-40 lakh funds they have. So whichever area that they can actually want to contribute to, they can. So those instruments are there, but it's about pushing them in the right direction, meeting the political agendas and all such kind of things. Yeah.
Right. Any other question? Any question? It was an urban design exercise from SEPT.
Telling about the case that they did in Kerala and Goa. Okay. The question that I have, and the question is, we are lacking in practice or communities. I think we're lacking in giving the voice to the communities. And that's something that our practice needs to bring in. And by practice, I mean us and also the planning instruments that we have. So we might say that, under Smart City or under Hriday, that there is a community participation funding or there is an angle to it. Now, how do we do that community participation is the crux. So I showed you the example of People Biodiversity Register. They have the instrument of making a BMC or the Biodiversity Management Committee, but it is done superficially. They have no knowledge, they have no capacity, they have no will to actually preserve their biodiversity. So if you just do it in a very superficial touch and go way, you're not really touching the spirit of community participation is what I think. And these processes are long. So like I said, in Meroli, we worked from 2014 till easily 2020. It's just been last 2 years that we kind of didn't engage with it as regularly. Mangar, we've already been working for like 8, 9, 10 months now. So these are long processes, to build the voice of community takes time.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. Thank you for nice session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ma'am. I would kindly request Mrs. Ritu Sharma Mehrotra, Head of Department of Urban Planning, to extend words of thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone and to one and all present here in the webinar. I thank all the participants, students who are attending this webinar. And thank you, Nidhi. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation, actually. And also for accepting the invitation in a very short notice. And as far as I know, Nidhi, she's a thorough professional. And I consider myself blessed to have worked with her. And she has been actually working on a wide range of projects. We all are lucky to hear and learn from her experiences and mostly to know about what is the role of communities in planning spaces and how we can build the capacities of local communities to ensure sustainability. I would extend my gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Dhar, for providing us such platforms of knowledge sharing and for his continuous encouragement. I thank Professor Vishalya Adi, Director, Institute of Architecture, for continuously supporting us. And last but not least, and yes, it's important, all the faculties of Architecture and Planning Department. I know you've been, too busy always actually, but thank you for organizing such a beautiful event. And always you've been organizing such events so flawlessly. Thank you, everyone, once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I would request all of you to kindly rise for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
With the end of the session, I'd like to thank you everyone for your gracious presence. I'd like to thank the guests for sharing their experience, knowledge. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
चलिए, thank you Nidhi ma'am, thank you Ritu ma'am. Namaskar.